Here we are, and Richard Harris has just asked for a glass of water.
I didn't ask for the glass of water, but I got it. do you know that just bring something rather back, sort of nostalgic things back. You know that when I began my first movie, was honoured to be with you, and also James Cagney. You know, one spends those ones. Yeah, James Cagney, absolutely superb man, an absolutely beautiful, beautiful man. And I remember sort of, how as a child you see him on the screen, his style, his technique, how he works and all that. And having been brought up on his movies and finally doing my first movie with him, it was very interesting to see that, the styles to which he works, how he arrived at a certain style of acting, which is extraordinary. I remember the very first day shooting, I wasn't called, I wasn't working that day, but I insisted on going to see him. You see, my God. So I went and I sat by the camera and there he was. And it's interesting because the whole thing, his whole style sort of was derived from mistakes. From mistakes he would make. Yeah, it's interesting this, that, apparently, unlike you, he had a very bad memory for lines. He couldn't quite remember his lines. And, if he'd walk in, for instance, he'd walk in and say, Dick Cavett, that's my glass of water, and you sit down there, right? So Cagney would say, action, take one, he'd walk in, he'd come in, he'd walk in the door, and he'd dash through the door, he'd say, now listen, glass of water. They say, oh no, it's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. So he'd stop and he'd go out again. Now take 15, you could see him trying to get it all together. Dick Cavett, you must remember the name, Dame Sybil, glass of water, he's got to get it right. So take 10, he was angry, paralytic out to the door, saying, gotta get it right, gotta get it right. So he'd dash through the door again, he'd say, Dame Sybil, oh, it's wrong. You see? But finally at the end, he'd get it all together. And you could see he's working hard. So he'd come through again, and suddenly take 10 or take 20 now, and he'd come through and he'd say, Cavett, Thorndike, water, sit down. Absolutely superb, yeah.
Louis was the judge in that. Do you remember my husband?
That's right, he was. That's right, yeah.
Which is lovely.
I heard you mentioning Bernard Shaw. That I've just done a movie, Man in the Wilderness, and with a man called Henry Wilcoxon, who originally played Antony in Antony and Cleopatra, played Colburn a long time ago. But he worked with Bernard Shaw, and it was a marvelous story. He said that how brilliant the man was and witty the man was. It was a marvelous story that they were doing Antony and Cleopatra in London, and Cedric Hardwicke was in it. I can't quite think of the lady at the time, but they were upstaging each other like mad, like mad. They were pulling strokes and pulling tricks, and they were trying to get the best views of each other and all that, And Bernard Shaw was sitting in the audience, and he stopped. He said, wait a minute now. He said, stop it. He said, I want to talk to the cast. So he said, drop the curtain. They dropped the curtain. He came back, and he said, ladies and gentlemen, he said, Mr. Hardwicke and Madam, he said, this play is called Antony and Cleopatra, not Antony versus Cleopatra.
I love it. Just like him.
Lovely.
Yeah.